everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Om-gnosis, the Occult South Asia podcast. Today, I have the privilege of introducing Anya Foxen and Sravana Borkataky-Varma to the podcast. First, a little bit about me. I'm Keith Cantú, and I'm currently a research affiliate at the Center for the Study of World Religions. Anya is currently an associate professor of religious studies at California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, or SLO, I think, right? As well as a research associate at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. Sravana Borkataky-Varma is an instructional assistant professor of Hindu studies at the University of Houston and has also been a research associate here at the Center for the Study of World Religions. So very happy that you all could join and talk about your research and new book and everything like that. So maybe we could begin. If you could tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, especially what drew you into the study of South Asian religions and academia more generally.
So, Anya, do you want to start first?
I think you should start.
I should start. All right. First of all, thank you, Keith, for inviting us to talk about our book. We've known each other for more than a decade, so it's really, really wonderful to also engage in a space of a podcast. So my background, I identify as a practitioner scholar and truly in that order. I was initiated in the larger space of Shakta Tantra or Goddess Tantra in Kamakya when I was 8.5, possibly years old, but before I hit double digits. And so I was a practitioner for the longest period of time. And it was much later in 2010, so about 16 years back, I decided to get a PhD. And at that time, when I started the journey, I didn't think I'm going to study my tradition. Mm-hmm. Or for that matter, do any degree of autoethnography and auto-reflection as part of my PhD dissertation. But that's what it landed up to be. So I became a scholar of my tradition, the ritual space, as well as for all practical purposes, myself and my own journey. And that's how, I identify as a practitioner scholar. I do specialize in Hindu esoteric traditions, especially the ritual spaces. And within that, I truly like to delve more into the multiple bodies that do come into play when we are in the ritual space. So that's kind of a very, very quick background to how I arrived at where I am today.
Well, thanks so much for that.
Yeah. Well, and I guess maybe I'll piggyback off of that and say that I'm a scholar practitioner, not always in that order. And I guess that's partially because maybe in a somewhat similar way to Sravana, for me, the practice stuff really came first. I started practicing postural yoga when I was 18, 19, something like that. So, a little over 2 decades ago now. And I really ultimately went to grad school to figure out what the heck it was that I was doing in this like hot, sweaty yoga room. At the time, there wasn't really, there was a little bit of scholarship in yoga studies. So Elizabeth D. Michaelis's book had already come out, Joseph Alter's. But really, there wasn't much to kind of explain this link between, the history of yoga in India and what was going on globally, right? What it was that I was actually practicing. And so really almost the entirety of my academic career has been sort of trying to answer that question. And largely by way of, again, trying to figure out what it was that was sort of going on in my body. So where that settled me is to being a comparativist, because of course yoga is this kind of like very hybrid thing that blends a lot of stuff, globally speaking. And increasingly, kind of to press maybe more on the practitioner component, somebody who really does study practices and what it means to be in a body and kind of phenomenologically, what does that look like and how does that work? How do we make sense of that?
Hmm. Yeah, so how do we make sense of that? And I mean, I guess that's a good segue into the book that you all just released, which I have, and The Serpent's Tail, Kuṇḍalinī Yoga and the History of an Experience was just released last year with Columbia University Press. And I got my copy at the Columbia stall at the latest AAR meeting. Based on the research for this book, could you actually give our viewers some idea of some specific meanings that Kuṇḍalinī can encompass? How is it related to the body, or in your case, Sravana, the tradition that you're a practitioner of? And also, what's the relation with serpents or snakes here? What's the title? And also, on that note, how do you recommend that people approach this book as a reader, and access the knowledge that is herein?
So I think there were what, 5 questions that you just
Yeah, it's a big
asked?
one. Everything about the
It's a
book.
really big one.
Everything. What is Kuṇḍalinī? Maybe we should start there.
Oh, I think we should never start with that because I don't think we'll ever have an answer to that. I
If we
think,
don't, then people on YouTube will be angry.
yeah, I know. Sorry to disappoint. I wish we had an answer and give a clear-cut definition, but I think that's where I would like to begin. This book really comes out of this journey of what is Kundalini. So I came in to the United States now 20 years ago. And when I started my PhD in studies, in Tantra and Hindu Tantra, swiftly the topic that would get discussed and popped up was Kundalini, right? It was just about anywhere and everywhere. And to my complete utter shock, now I'm going to give my age away if you're good at math, but doesn't matter. But almost like 27, 28 years of my existence before that as a practitioner, Kundalini never came up. It was never part of the training. It was never part of the tradition. No one really spoke about it as, in the US, it's almost like Tantra, Hindu Tantra, is synonymous to sex and, sexual energies and orgasms, so on and so forth. And then another parallel thread that it just kind of gets very intertwined with is this whole idea of Kundalini. So the book really starts there. What is it? Why and how and when and who? Like, name it. And the idea was to really parse out that super complex history of what is Kundalini, how is it even mentioned in some of these ancient texts, when, how, and who are the players where Kundalini becomes Kundalini Yoga, and then where does Kundalini Yoga take us when it becomes a product in the marketplace. So it's kind of this very long and complex and sweeping brush stroke journey of a concept that becomes a product and it comes to stay. So I'm going to now, have Anya speak about the serpent and how the serpent kind of is not just what Kundalini is associated with, but again, has such a complex transmission history. So Anya, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I guess on that note, Shravana, I think you have this really good way of when you talk about the serpent, right? Kind of talking about the sociocultural DNA of an image, of a concept, of a symbol. And the serpent is such a strong and clear example of that, right? Because, I mean, it is one of these symbols that kind of pops up all over the place. But if you look at what's going on with serpents, and Kuṇḍalinī is in those ancient texts compared to a serpent, right? What's going on with serpents in that South Asian context, the way that they're associated with like divinity, for instance. You see something very different when you look at serpents in Western sources. And so insofar as Kuṇḍalinī, I mean, kind of like yoga in a sense, right? It's this kind of hybrid globalized thing now, that's gone through this transmission where we've had all these kind of different cultural strands entangle. It's in many ways the serpent that kind of like binds the thing together, because that was this kind of symbol that both cultures had somewhere at their core. But the meanings of the symbol are really different, right? And of course, in the West, that's where we get a lot of this baggage with, sexuality and the biblical serpent, and maybe it's something dangerous, or maybe it's some kind of, like secret knowledge, but it's like a little bit transgressive. And again, you get these sort of like elements of possible danger. Where, yeah, it really becomes a like kind of a mini universe for Kuṇḍalinī, just like tracking these images of the serpent, insofar as you immediately see that it's not one thing. It's this kind of like kaleidoscope of these different practices, these different images, these different experiences.
So I'm getting Sravana's sort of expressing the Om side and Anya's the Gnosis side a little bit right now. Right.
Actually, Keith, that's a pretty accurate way of putting together both what we bring to the table, and also writing a book together is a project, right? I mean, it's not, and so many people have asked us this question in terms of how did you do it? Like, would you even do it again? Are you still friends? Yes to all of the above, but I think that's what works. You're absolutely right. We bring two very different yet complementary, speaking to each other, training of self, training within our scholarship, and it speaks very well with each other. So I think you picked on that really well. You had another very interesting question at the end of the 5 big questions. Is how do we recommend people read the book? Now, we are at exactly 6 months since the book came out, and we are really, really thrilled because not only did Columbia University Press publish it for US and Europe, but in India, for the Indian market, Penguin Random House published it. So, we have kind of that tie-up in India. And a lot of readers who are not used to, or their everyday reading, they're readers, but their everyday reading does not encompass what we typically read on a daily basis because of our work, because of our research. Quite a few, including close family, friends, they started complaining about the book. They were like, this is so challenging. We can't even get past chapter 1. It is so technical. We have to Google, so many terms. And for initially, I was very, very confused. I was like, what are you so confused about? This is so easy. And then, I always have these light bulb moments. Both of you know of these moments that happen. I suggested this to now a group of people who are in a book club and to my friends, to my family, to read the book backwards, which means start from chapter 8. And then go 8, 7, 6, 5, go down that route. So read the introduction, then go straight to the end of the book. And as you move backwards, they have had a far greater success. They actually love the books, which obviously, we want to hear that. Otherwise, it's like a dagger to our heart when they say we don't understand anything. So I would recommend our listeners give it a shot. Read the introduction and go backwards completely and see how you feel about it.
Do you think part of that has to do with the idea that Kundalini and the contemporary imagination is kind of so ubiquitous that people sort of might get hooked in on wanting to, dig deeper or further into the past of these threads and roots and so on?
100%. And also, what is happening is, and that's what we kind of sort of say in the last chapter too, right? And we've spoken about this in so many podcasts and other media channels. Anytime you hear Kundalini, chances are you will Google it, right? And the minute you Google it, you are landing in a very, very particular capsular form of Kundalini, which is Kundalini yoga, which is again very refined a form of practice. So can't blame the readers, right? Like that's what they're getting. That's what they're seeing in social media and Google. So it's the last chapter, therefore makes a lot of sense. It's kind of, it's already speaking to what they are used to already through all these multiple channels we consume information through. So so I think that's what is going on.
Well, and the book is written chronologically in a sense, right? It's a transmission history. History we tend to treat as though it goes in a straight line. And so in a sense, it wouldn't have made sense for us to start the book with chapter 8, right? Because then it would have been like kind of a weird setup. But for a reader, that actually might make sense if they're not already kind of embedded in this world where they kind of know what the lay of the land is, right? Because chapter 8 starts then essentially with the present moment. And then you start kind of peeling back these layers of like, okay, but how did we get here? And by the time that you get to all the Sanskrit in chapter 1, then you're maybe a little bit more ready for it because you at least kind of know where we're going.
The reader can say, "Oh, I've seen that at the yoga studio," right? Somewhere, or in that page. Well, in that, that actually jumped out at me a little bit in the subtitle of the book. It's Kuṇḍalinī Kama Yoga, and I think that Kama is doing a lot of work there. It's not Kuṇḍalinī Yoga in the history. So since you did mention Kuṇḍalinī Yoga, if you could just say what is, the work of separating Kuṇḍalinī and yoga versus this fixed phrase that even I've heard quite a bit, like Kuṇḍalinī yoga, like the 3HO and yogi.
Yeah, no, that was very perceptive, Keith. You're absolutely right. That comma is doing a lot of work. They actually, initially yoga wasn't even in the title, and the publisher actually suggested it to us, which, made sense because of course yoga is such a big part of this puzzle. But then, immediately we were like, okay, but you need to have the comma. And I think they almost left it out on one of the set of like cover proofs that we got. We were like, no, like you must fix this.
Right.
Because otherwise, it kind of becomes just this packaged product in a sense that like today, right, represents really only one strand of this larger history, which is kind of the 3HO Yogi Bhajan, the sort of trademarked Kundalini yoga effectively. And even beyond that, right? I mean, this is kind of what we talk about in the later part of the book. And Sravana has already mentioned where there's this sort of like almost like a bundling that happens of Kundalini as a concept and yoga as a practice, which isn't like an odd pairing to make historically, right? Of course, like yoga was one of the practices that would have been associated with Kundalini. But it becomes so kind of like unilateral in a sense, right? You can't really find any other versions of Kundalini after a certain point. And so we wanted to kind of like do a nod towards that, but also really affirm that like this is not a necessary alliance, that there really is a lot more going on here.
In fact, as Anya said, first proofs did have the comma missing, and we had so much of a heartburn. And same happened with the initial few media coverages as well. They too missed the comma, and they wrote it as Kundalini yoga, and it's been it's been a journey of the karma.
Journey of the Kama. All right. Well,
Yeah.
Kundalini pause yoga. Let's reflect on
Mhm.
that pause for a second.
Right.
Well, I mean, so I think that's a good segue actually into the next question that I had, which is that, zooming out, I think that you all are pretty aware, with your background and the research that you do. Most scholars of South Asian religions usually focus on either pre-modern or modern, kind of one or the other. And I think a major contribution of this book is how it really attempts to span this bigger picture, like what we were talking about. And I'm curious what you think emerges from looking at this big picture of a topic like Kundalini, and why is it important to examine Kundalini from the variety of angles? I mean, there's one example to sort of, parse Kundalini and yoga, but, what are some other ways in which it's really kind of important to look at this idea from a bigger picture?
Well, I think one thing that you really gain, right, is you get to see the cultural diversity of the thing and how the kind of
Mhm.
global concept that we have today comes together. Because of course, if you were looking at Kundalini only in a modern sense, I mean, you could do some sort of, side by side where it's like, okay, here's how it exists in India, here's maybe what's going on in the West or something like that. But like you would sort of almost, I think, lose the forest for the trees if you were
Mhm.
to do that.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas, and I mean, we were also purposefully kind of writing less technically because we wanted to reach a popular audience.
Right.
So, the kind of yeah, maybe broader scope of the thing also speaks to that intention. For us, being able to tell this kind of longer story, to trace really both sides of the transmission, both kind of, how the concept is embedded in pre-modern South Asian sources, but also then like what are the precedents for this kind of thing in, in Europe and North America. This really, I think, allowed us to paint a fuller picture that made sense of why things look maybe kind of as chaotic as they do today. Once you
Mhm.
start digging below the surface of that kind of standard model that immediately pops out to you on Google. Why is it that there's sort of so much disagreement about what is and isn't Kundalini and what's authentic and
Mhm.
what should this be like? Well, it's because, right, there's like centuries and centuries and centuries of stuff behind this.
Yeah. Hmm.
And if I were to add two more things to that, one is also, which is true. I mean, it's in the text, it's in the practice, but we wanted to bring forth this very particular thing of pushing back that Kundalini or real Kundalini
Mm.
experience only comes from root to up, right? So it's kind of coming through the central channel, through the Shushumna. It starts in the Swadhisthana or somewhere thereabouts, and it's the serpent rising. But if we look at the text, and also when we speak to practitioners, there are so many practitioners, and the texts say it can also rise in the heart, right?
Mm.
And the experience of practitioners when it rises in the heart can be very different. Not always, but can be different to when it rises from the base or the root of the body up. So that was
Mm.
one thing that we also wanted to actively speak about. The other thing which I feel very strongly about, and I just, I can say this without being apologetic, is this pushback, right? A lot of times, what we find, especially in today's climate, is this appropriation conversation. There is this, or the Oriental lens conversation, the colonial conversation. Now, all these conversations are extremely important to have. So,
Mm.
not for once I'm saying they're not important, and we must have these conversations. However, there are certain traditions, there are certain histories, there are certain transmission histories, like we see with Kundalini becoming Kundalini Yoga. It is a very mutual back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right?
Mm.
So it's not just someone picking something from another culture, from another region, plucking it and running with it. There are active players from what would then become India, after independence, but from the Indian subcontinent, from South Asia, they would be very important figures who would equally contribute to this dialogue. So that was another really important aspect. And that's why we very intentionally describe, our chapter titles are East meets West, West meets East. So it's not like we could not be creative, but we really wanted to, without having to harp upon this, on and on, state that this is a very complex transmission history with both parts very actively contributing to this meshing of what becomes Kundalini yoga.
Did I mention that you give the best transitions to subsequent questions, Sravana? I think that's like 2 for 2. That was a great transition into the next question. But
this
most...
is what happens when we are friends for that long. We can figure this out.
But certainly, yes, certainly, and in all certainty, the conversation that you all are having in this book, I think, is really important, and it shows that you all are open to having that conversation in a sensitive and nuanced way, which I think is much more productive than just ignoring the conversation, altogether. And so that's really great. And you all know from, some of the research that I've done and from this podcast, it's titled, the subtitle, The Occult South Asia Podcast. And whenever possible, I try to see how guests are engaging with this category of occult, which was part of that, broader exchange and still is part of that exchange. It means hidden, right? It comes from a word in Latin that means hidden. I know that especially the middle part of the book examines authors such as the founders of the Theosophical Society and the Arthur Avalon collaboration, from the Serpent Power and so on. And you'll find the language of occultism in these contexts. And I'm curious how you perceive this as a category and how it can be useful or not when engaging Indic ideas like Kuṇḍalinī and, this process of exchange that you're discussing.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I can speak to that a little bit, just because the occult, or I mean, I maybe use esoteric a little bit more frequently, but same general idea, right? Like that's obviously popped up quite a bit in my work on yoga because it has this sort of like very similar history. I find those categories really useful in a certain way, but only if we kind of like explain and disambiguate them a little bit, right? For like a popular audience. Most of the time when I say occult to my students, they think like a cult.
A cult, yeah.
Right?
I think
like,
most
no,
transcription services do too. Like sometimes when I do the subtitles of the videos, like it never gets a cult right. It always changes it to a cult.
Yeah, and so like I do think it's a really useful term, right? For representing, I mean, on the one hand, something that's generically, yeah, maybe sort of, hidden in all these various ways, whether that's from, like kind of an institutional perspective where these are practices or traditions that require initiation or something like that. Or that it's dealing with, kind of forces that we don't physically see with our eyes. That this is dealing with, a level of reality, whether we want to call that the subtle body or however we want to sort of frame that, that's maybe like sort of below the surface of our regular day to day. Just, I have to go to the market and buy some apples reality.
Right.
So yeah, I think in that sense, it's a term that has a lot of richness to it potentially. But it's like people don't really know what you're talking about a lot of the time. And that I find on the one hand difficult, but on the other hand, if you kind of, you, Keith, of course, are very aware of like some of the politics right around like whether Western esotericism is a particular thing. I think that actually there's this great opportunity to, as we have these conversations and as we use these terms, to maybe reframe them a little bit, as we familiarize, kind of a wider audience with like what this thing actually is, to, reposition it as something that can be cross-cultural because it has these sort of, like corollaries at least, across these different times and places.
Sure.
And in all this, I think there is also the experience and the experiencer. right? What happens when we actively, either knowingly or unknowingly, either through Google or through our research, have the concept of occult or esotericism mixed in our experience? What happens to the experiencer? Is Do we, without realizing, tune in to a certain set of experience or a language to provide meaning as well as articulate our experience? And the minute we lean into language and we use this kind of a model of occult and esotericism, I also feel it does something to the experiencer. It does something to the experience itself. What if the word occult did not exist? Like, I borrow what, Keith, I learned from you, this whole two terms of magic as in MAGIC and MAGICK. And I use this in my classroom. Like, I teach this over 2 weeks. What language does, how it helps us articulate. And by doing so, it's doing something to the experience as well. And in this book, in fact, that's how this book really came about, as Anya and me, was Gopi Krishna's experience, right? When Gopi Krishna wrote to Sri Aurobindo, immediately after he had experiences, he framed it in a very particular way. 10 years later, 15 years later, his language changes. He articulates the same experience very, very differently. So what happened here? And I think Anya, in our initial conversation, this is what she picked on, because I was getting so frustrated with Gopi Krishna at that time. I was like, why are you changing? What are you doing? Like, how do I trust you? And Anya was like, hold on, there is something more going on here, and we need to parse that out. So I think that's also something, especially in a podcast like Om-gnosis, I think is worth taking a pause and sitting with that information. What do terms like this do to us with regards to the experience as well as us as an experiencer?
Yeah, that's a great point. And language can do so much to frame and color experiences. And, I think the historical analysis gets us, in one place of that. And then there's also this sort of whole emic practitioner perspective as well. Yeah, you're right to point that out.
Yeah.
Well, based on that, where are you going next? I think that's another good segue. So I think you're 3 for 3. I know you all are working on altered states, which is something that's very, unique to the experience and, how we frame our reality and so on. And so, in addition to this work on altered states and so on, what other sort of current work and research projects do you all have in the pipeline, either together or individually? And maybe, share where can people find more about your work and your, current activities, and get in touch with you, if they found this interesting.
Sonia, do you want to speak first?
You go. I need to collect my thoughts for a second. What am I working on? I don't know.
So many questions there. We both felt, okay, let me rewind. We underestimated what it means to market a book. At least I did. And by December, what had happened is the book came out in September, and by December, I felt truly burned out. It was so much, and it required such intensity. And I actually was talking about this. Oh, by the way, you can edit it later if you want to, but I got a Precedence Award for scholarship with high impact from my university yesterday.
Why would I edit that out? Everyone's saying
I don't know. People don't like to talk about it.
Home. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So no, and they asked me this question yesterday, like, how was the journey? How hard? Because I think the questions were more framed around how hard it was to write this book. And I said, I don't think that was that hard. We are trained in our PhD to come up with an idea, to do the research, and to write. Right. We kind of know how to do that, but nobody taught us what it means to market that book. So, long story cut short, very burnt out in December. I wrote to Anya. I said, I can't do this anymore. This is like really hard. So I took a break. For the last 2.5 months or so, I decided I'm not writing. I don't want to read. I don't want to research. And now I'm ready. So we have a model of working together, which involves a lot of talking, sometimes over glasses of wine.
Sounds effective.
And very, very tantra. Come on.
There you go. One of the 5 M's. There you go.
Yeah, the 5 M's. And Anya has somewhere in this book project came up with the brilliant idea of recording these conversations sometimes. So we are now going to start our project, which is titled as Altered. We are dropping the states right now. Okay. Hopefully our publisher will allow that. And we just met actually 3 weeks back, 4 weeks back. I flew to Santa Barbara for an event, and we are going to restart our Zoom dates where we are going to talk and record, and from these talks comes out a book. And so yeah.
Hopefully.
So No. We don't say hopefully. There is a book. It's going to come out, and we have a process to our madness. So that's the joint project. My second project is, which I think both of you know, it's been going on for a very long time, but I think now I'm ready, is to talk about status of women in Hindu Tantra. And I push back on this historical scholarship where, there is this empowered or abused narrative. So either scholars have said that Hindu Tantra ritual space is empowering to women, or they have gone on the other side and said it's very abusive to women. And I have come to realize, and my research shows that it actually, we will do a better job if we take women not as a homogeneous group, but in different roles. So what happens when a woman is a guru? What happens when a woman is a wife of a male guru? What happens when a woman is a consort or a ritual specialist, but purely a consort? And where are the hijras or the kinnars, as they they use the term now? Where are they in this space? Because they do identify as women. So that's my personal project. It's been going on for a long time, but it's about time that I finish this project. So those are my 2 big book projects right now.
Great. And where can people find out more about?
I do maintain a website, shravanaspeaks.com. So my first name, speaks.com. I also, I used to send a monthly newsletter. This year I'm taking a break from that. So I will be maybe sending out 3 this year. So I'm getting ready to send 1 in April sometime. So yeah, you can also sign up for my newsletter. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking.
Of course. Yeah. I remember getting those.
Thank you for saying that about the burnout, Sravana. I mean, I think that's kind of why I punted this question to you, because I'm just feeling the exact same way. Which, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's one thing to write a book. It's another thing to kind of like the afterlife of the thing, right? And once you're ready to sort of like let it go, like there it is out in the world. Now you have to like continue to tell people about it, which is really fun. I'm so grateful that we're getting to do it, but it's also just exhausting. And so, yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm also now kind of like ready to get into the altered stuff, which feels to me very continuous with kind of what we did with the Kuṇḍalinī book, right? And in a sense, it's taking that and it's like kind of blowing it up into this wider thing. Because really what we're talking about, hence why we're dropping, I mean, certainly the consciousness, right? Because often people talk about altered states of consciousness. Nobody can define that, right? So I think we sort of rightfully decided to just sweep it off the table table, but also dropping the states, because really what we're talking about are not kind of like static things. We're really talking about embodied practices.
Mm.
So I think that, it'll be good to sort of get that going in a more concrete way, because so far it's just been percolating in my head, kind of in the background for, since Sravana and I first talked about this, what, 2, 3 years ago now.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and otherwise, I don't know. I've been writing fiction, which
Okay.
has been sort of a
Wow.
nice departure from, academic stuff. I think in general, now that I'm sort of maybe more in the practitioner phase of my scholar practitioner identity, it's been occurring to me that actually this kind of more creative writing is itself a practice.
Certainly.
It has been a practice for me throughout my life. So that's definitely, I mean, in a sense that goes hand in hand with the altered stuff, right? Because of course, art, literature, all these things can serve as embodied practices that take us into these kind of other spaces and other ways of experiencing ourselves, our bodies, our worlds. But I think that's also something that's very personal for me. And it's
Mm.
something that, especially in the midst of doing like a bajillion podcasts, I found it to be really rewarding to just sit down and like work on my novel or
Mm.
write a poem. Um, and it's something that I'm also trying to, as I kind of like plug back into the practitioner space in general a little bit more. It's something that I'm trying to like integrate a little bit more into my teaching. Because, for instance, for me, movement and writing are very,
Mhm.
very conjoined,
Mm.
and really work like kind of symbiotically. So since I started this whole journey basically as a yoga teacher, I'm not going to say I'm going exactly back to my roots, but maybe, I've like sent off a little shoot in this other direction, and I'm kind of like planting myself in a new practitioner patch at this point. Um, yeah, I guess maybe also, since this is something that Sravana inspired, I'll mention that I finally like got off my butt and relaunched my newsletter just this past week.
Okay. Great.
Which, that's also been fun to take as a kind of opportunity to maybe play with some of these ideas rather than having it be, this like pressure of like you have to like market what you've been doing for the
Mhm.
last month.
Mm.
Which Shrav and I know the strain of that. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, just kind of like taking the time to, enjoy playing with concepts and
Mm.
playing with ideas.
Great. So where can people find that or information about your
Yeah,
newsletter?
so I have a website. It's anyafoxen.com. And so the newsletter actually currently exists in two places. You can sign up through just, like regular email there, or it's also now a Substack.
Mm.
So
Cool.
apparently now I do Substack,
Oh
which
yeah.
I
So
hadn't
seems
really
where
known was much of a
seems where
thing
the
until
media is
this
at
past
right now. So yeah.
week.
Good.
And the key, you know, I hope we have a couple of minutes there.
Of
I
course.
also want to say something here about how different all three of us are in so many ways, yet similar. So for Anya, I've noticed writing is almost healing. Writing brings her, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anya, but I have noticed that writing fills you up. It just makes you so joyful. And yes, you're cranky when you are in the deep writing, and you don't want to
Thank
talk
you
to
for
anybody.
acknowledging that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We all know that. But what I'm saying is writing is very filling in many ways than one for you. It's your practice. It's your sadhana. You enjoy writing. I do not enjoy writing.
Mm.
If I'm allowed, I will say I hate writing. I know we're not supposed to use the term hate, or yada yada. Culture will correct me,
Mm.
but writing is the most anxiety inducing thing in my
Mm.
life, and yet we do it, right? And that's somewhere in the mix of anxiety and fulfilling our cup, we land in this space which is very enriching but can also have deep burnouts, and it's not either or, it's an all cap and
Mm.
and
Mm.
and
Mm. Mm.
that's been our journey in the last 6 months.
Mm. Mm. Well, maybe, to tie it back to Kundalini, if you look at Kundalini as this creative force, within the body and mind, it might affect us all in, our own unique ways. Mm.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, anything else that you'd like to add before we say goodbye? You feel like you covered it?
Buy the book.
Buy the book, yes. Buy the
Please
book.
buy
It's
the book.
available,
Please
and
buy
it's
the book. Yeah.
nice to know it. We were joking. It's written in Anya's heart here, the book as well. So, and it's also available in India, you said, with Penguin
That's
Press,
right. And it's with Penguin Random House. So
Penguin
you
Random
have it in
House,
the smaller bookstores.
the airport.
At the airport. And I love it when a friend would travel and send me a little video. Look, I found your book in this store in India. It makes me extremely happy. So,
That's
yeah,
awesome. I'll try to hunt it down in the wild as well there. Yeah. And here, I mean, you can get it, I guess, in the wild at your local bookstores and everything. So,
yes. Yeah.
thank you so much for taking your time to share with us today. And I guess we'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much.
Thank you.